The first one is 3D animation of Babylon. This is Euphrates. That was external aspects, external features of Babylon. Now I will play another short video on the internal, inside the mind of a Babylon. What is the mindset of the people of Babylon? So let me share the second video. That's also short.
This dragon here, called a Mushkhushu, is about 2,500 years old, and it comes from Nebuchadnezzar's capital city, Babylon, in the middle of ancient Iraq. And when you see it now, when you look at it and look in its eye, it might strike you as something very alien and very distant and nothing to do with the modern world. Well, the culture from which it comes, the Babylonian world, is surprisingly close to ours. And the thinkers and the writers and the poets and the mathematicians of that ancient culture came up with things which still exist today in our modern lives and are part of our daily life all around us. These Babylonian discoveries and ideas are conveyed to us through the ancient form of writing called cuneiform, written on tablets of clay or stone. The Babylonian language is fully understood today, so that many of their ideas and achievements have been preserved for us. Great engineers have come up with very ingenious machinery to measure the passage of time. And one of the interesting things about the ancient Babylonians was that they had a mathematical system based on 60, not on 10 like we do today. And one consequence of this is the fact that our own time division of the minute and the hour into 60th parts is a direct inheritance of a principle which goes back to ancient Babylon. And it's come down to us somehow through the Greeks, who looked at Babylonian ideas, incorporated them into their own work, and maintained this 60 figure as a central calculating device. And that is why everyone who has a watch on their wrist or a clock on their kitchen wall is somehow perpetuating the work of these ancient Babylonian thinkers. The Babylonians were always attempting to predict the future. This clay model of a sheep's liver, complete with gallbladder, was used to teach the art of divination, the zones and cuneiform inscriptions revealing the ominous signs. Much later, people relied on dreams or the stars for their portentous messages. Another thing that's come to us from ancient Babylon are the signs of the zodiac. And this goes back a long way. Already in the second millennium, some of the figures which became the zodiac figures were already to be found on monuments. And side by side with the zodiac grew up in the late period the idea of the horoscope. So the thing when you open your newspaper and you look up your star sign and read what it predicts, or you get a horoscope, those two ideas likewise come from ancient Babylon.
Activate offers.
That brings us to the end of the presentation. Now we are opening the room for discussion, comments, and your insight.
Good night, everybody. Got to get up at 2 a.m. Bye.
Bye, Peggy.
Yes, Alan.
Oh, yeah, being dismayed at the signs in the heavens. As he was just there talking about the horoscope, the zodiac likely having originated there. And you talked about the god of Jupiter, I think, with Baal. If we go over to Jeremiah, chapter 10, we see this idea of being dismayed at the signs in the heavens. Because I think all the ancient cultures who didn't understand solar eclipses were wondering, is this an ominous sign that the gods are going to somehow mete out some kind of judgment? I mean, this is what I've heard in the past. Is it really true? Well, they were definitely mystified by the motions of the sun and moon and the planets, because the planets move differently than the stars. And that was one of the biggest mysteries for ancient astronomers. Why do all the stars move in the same pattern? Winter, they all shift at the same time to summer, and they shift back and forth in unison, but the planets do not. They shift differently, and they run a different course with a different timing. So all this was considered to be the signs in the heavens. So in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1 and 2.
Do you want to go there?
Yeah, that would be good. It's just when you were talking earlier about Jupiter, it struck me about this phrase, being dismayed at the signs in the heavens, and why people would be dismayed. And if you've ever witnessed a full solar eclipse, it is a strange phenomenon. And you witness it with the knowledge of scientific explanation. But they did not. They did not witness it,
Yeah.
understanding what was happening.
Which chapter?
10. Hear ye the word of the Lord speaks unto you, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord. Learn not the way of the heathen. The way. Which way is the way of the heathen? It's the way of the Babylonian system, for sure,
Yeah. Wow.
and many other definitions of different ways that point back to that system. And be not dismayed at the signs in heaven, of heaven. The heathen are dismayed at them. So this is just a phrase that came out of my memory when you were talking about Jupiter, the god Jupiter, which was highly esteemed because you yourself know how bright Jupiter can come out in the sky at different times of year, and it was highly esteemed by them to represent divine power, one that was to be feared, one that could bless you, one that would have all the characteristics of an ancient god. So this is one thing that I'm sure ancient Babylon was guilty of. As you know, at the time of Jeremiah, Daniel is getting ready to go in. The first siege on Jerusalem is coming. And Jeremiah spent most of his ministry as a prophet warning about that. A most hated man he was. It was a terrible thing. But when they punished him and put him in the slime pit, the moat is what they think. But anyway, I just wanted to make that.
Thank you. Good reference. The astrology and watching the stars was definitely Babylonian, and God is warning, don't be dismayed. Any other comments, any other insight you have with the presentation, any disagreements? Any other things that you know of Babylon? Yes, Gaileen.
Thank you for the presentation. About Babylon, in the Bible, before I knew about the Old Testament and we only concentrated on the New Testament, every Christmas time, or because in the Philippines, January, the first Sunday of January is the Three Kings. So we would all go, okay, where did these three kings come from? How come they know about Christ? So all these things were a blur, too many, and even now, and supposedly some pastors, I would ask, where did they come from, and they can't even answer where, but they probably are from Babylon because they came to from the east and they were influenced by Daniel. So that's the only other thing I could think of about Babylon in the Bible. Aside from being all evil, this was something good influence. And so thank you. That's it.
Welcome, Gailin. That's right. Magi, they were called Magi. They are from Babylon originally. In the next presentation, when we discuss about Nebuchadnezzar, we also see Magi in his kingdom. So you see the same word Magi. They come to see the baby Christ when he was born and he was in manger. So they were asking and come there. That's a good point. Yes, Tom.
What about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon?
It is believed to be during Nebuchadnezzar's time. Before Nebuchadnezzar brought it to its prime, to its peak, there were other kings preceded him. So they laid the foundation, but Nebuchadnezzar's wife, she always wanted gardens. She loved gardens. So he spent lots of money, lots of efforts to build gardens. And she wanted to see her probably from her bedroom all the time. So he raised structures and then put the dirt on the top of the walls or embankments, and then he fed waters somehow through those gardens. And then for a person from outside, perhaps from Euphrates River outside of Babylon, they can still see these humongous trees, but they appear to be upside down because they grow and bend forward, and from a distance they appear that they are hanging from the top of these walls or top of these mounds. So from the mounds they were hanging down. That's where we get Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and it was designated to be one of the 8 wonders of the ancient world. We will touch upon that next presentation, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Why would the trees be bent down?
Sorry, can you
I said,
repeat?
why would the trees be bent down?
They don't bend down, they appear like that. It's an illusion because you don't see the root of the tree because it was all covered. At least that's what I was reading from these historians and their accounts, and they grow in some direction, perhaps wherever there is light source is coming, they tend to bend, and that bend is causing an illusion that they are upside down kind of thing. You see the branches and the edge of the leaves, they're below the bottom of the tree. The bottom seems to be at a greater elevation than the branches. It's an illusion, it's not real from the vantage point of view of an observer from outside of Babylon city.
So they were very tall, raised beds. The first raised beds, huh?
Kind of, yes. Several of things we can trace back to Babylon. You're right. She also liked mountains, Nebuchadnezzar's wife. So there were no mountains, it's all plain. So he got dirt from somewhere and created an artificial mountain kind of things, couple of mounds, they call them mounds. And then he planted on the top of these mounds also.
He must not have had a lot of other things to do, huh?
Yeah, the queens are important. What queen says. We learn more about the mind of Babylon when we come to Nebuchadnezzar. They're also cruel and ruthless, and they're also given to pleasure. Lots of pleasure and drinking. That was very common.
Well,
And
like
that,
today.
yeah, that led to lots of vices, lots of complications, and they invited wrath of God in several ways. Yeah, Alan, let's go to Alan.
Well, we see a kind of parallel in the life of Abraham with the life of every believer. Since Abraham, if you could go over to Joshua 24.
Okay.
Since Abraham was called out of Babylon, he was called out of a land of idol worship. Worship of idols, idolatry was rampant, of course. That's all the people knew. So how long of a time do we estimate it was between Nimrod and Abraham? It's not a very long time.
Not
It might
very
be-
long, few
It
generations.
might be 100 years or thereabouts.
Yeah.
I forgot what the estimations are, but we're very close in
Mhm.
Genesis when we come from the Tower of Babel
Mhm.
to Abraham's calling. So Abraham in Joshua chapter 24, it says here in the first couple verses. Now, this is Joshua gathering the tribes together to give them a kind of a farewell message. If you read through this whole chapter, it's an amazing chapter. It brings you through the history of Israel from the time of Abraham up to the day of Joshua's dying. So before he dies, he brings them all together. And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and for the judges and for the officers. And they presented themselves there before Joshua. No, they presented themselves before God. This is a solemn occasion. This is not a small thing here. Joshua is getting ready to give them instruction to follow after he's gone. And they're appearing before God to receive this. And Joshua said to all the people that he assembled, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time." What he means by that is they dwelt on the other side of the Euphrates. The word flood there is a reference to that river that flooded its banks in the spring. Even Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. And then I took your father Abraham away from the other side of that flood and led him to Canaan. So here's an introduction to the history of Abraham's family, reminding the people our beginnings were the beginnings of being taken out of serving other gods.
Mhm.
And when Abraham was called to leave his homeland, he was being called out of Babylon. He's being called out of idolatry. And it wasn't just any idolatry, it was the idolatry of Babylon. It was Nebuchadnezzar's idolatry 500 years later. If we look at the timeline of Daniel, it's about a 500-year span from Abraham forward to Daniel. So these things last a long, long time. America hasn't been around 300 years. So we can try to imagine how this foundation of idolatry and demonic worship, it penetrated the culture in such a way. 500 years later, Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, at that time, it's still Babylonian worship. To tell us something about how hard it is to shed those things away. These few verses remind us of what Abraham was called out of, and how we ought to look at us and say, we are called out of this difficult situation, a kind of an idolatrous situation that stands the test of time. It is not easily removed, but it hangs around forever, even until Revelation 18. So that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, interesting thing that you say, even Talmud is from Babylon. That still influences us. I have another interesting story to share with. This is from Two Babylons, a book, Two Babylons, written by Alexander Hislop. He mentioned one strange incident. Indian army, when they were still under British rule, this is sometime around 1800s or early 1900s, they were fighting in Middle East under the banner of United Nations peacekeeping force. So they were bearing a UN badge and fighting in the Middle East, and they came to a Babylonian ancient relic, an ancient excavated city. And when the soldiers saw the pictures of Babylonian gods, they recognized most of them, and they could identify them by their Hindu names, Hindu god and goddess names. And they laid down their rifles and guns to the side, and they bowed down and worshipped the images. And that was reported to archaeologists, and they were shocked at this incident because they thought the Babylonian pantheon has nothing to do with Indian or Hindu religion. That proved that there are links, dotted links between Hinduism and ancient Babylonian pantheon. And several other religions can be traced one way or other to the Babylonians. They are the first big mystery religion. In the email that Don sent out, the invitation email, I gave a bunch of scriptures in the Old Testament that deal with Babylon. Isaiah 13 and 14. Please go through at your convenience, those scriptures. I want to go through each of those scriptures and build a case for Babylon. Since we decided to pursue Babylon also in addition to Little Horn, so that serves as foundation for us to understand Mystery Babylon and Revelation. Yes, let's go,
Genesis
Hall.
Hi.
Paul or
It's
Scarlett,
Scarlett.
I don't know.
Yeah. You probably mentioned this, and you're probably building your foundation before you get into the Revelation with Babylon. When you said what comes to mind when you think of Babylon, of course, those scriptures are the first that come up in my mind. Is where Babylon is fallen, that great one, this great city in Revelation 14, and then Revelation 18 goes through the fall of Babylon and how the world mourns Babylon's fall, and the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn. You probably covered some of that at some point. I have missed out on some of the studies. But is that where you're going eventually, to understand who or what that's about?
Yes, I believe we have to build concept from scratch, from Tower of Babel, and it makes much better sense when we eventually come to Revelation 17 and 18, because the patterns are same. The scope is different, the entity is different. So last time, I think you were there last time. So Babylon is a concept. This concept occurs several times throughout the history of man. Sometimes it's just a group of people building a tower. Sometimes it's a city-state. Sometimes it's a superpower ruling the whole world. And finally, when we come to Revelation, it's a woman riding the beast. But what is common across all these incidents or instances of Babylon? There are certain things common. There's a spirit of rebellion. Let us make our own Shem. And going opposite to what God says. There's a rebellion. There's a authority. You make a God suitable to yourself. That's what we learned in last presentation. So we learned few more things from Isaiah 13 and 14. God calls it a proud mountain. I will make you a plain before, O proud mountain, and I will bring down your lofty walls, your broad walls. It talks lots of the verses God talks about that. We don't quite understand unless we go through this historical information. And once we understand Isaiah and Jeremiah, it makes much big sense. Revelation 17 and 18. And you have verse to verse match between Jeremiah 51 and Revelation 17 and 18. So that's why I'm taking pain or efforts to go through this.
Okay, well, thanks.
No.
I know you mentioned that, I thought it interesting, Babylon kills Christians, the beast kills, Little Horn kills, all of those entities kill, and they seem to be around the same, well, the end time, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'll let Gail go and I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
End time, it is spiritual, and some of the judgments are same. In Jeremiah 50, 51, you see give her double. Here also you see give her double. And you also, Babylon would perish like a millstone thrown into water. Here in Revelation, it is also like a millstone thrown into ocean. It would never rise again. But interesting differences is it was thrown into Euphrates in Jeremiah. And then it is thrown into the sea in Revelation 17, 18. There are minor differences, but they are very significant, very important. Just stay on the series. Yes, Gailen.
When you were describing or about Babylon and its square, it reminded me like it's copying the New Jerusalem coming because it's a cube. And then it's also huge. So just sort of like what heaven is versus what man and the demons want to create on earth. And then I'm into ancient histories. And when you mentioned about India, I go to YouTube and there's this guy who does like go to the temples and explain. But it's not just that, but ziggurats are seen all over the world. It's in South America. Some are even saying some places that has now looked like mountains are used to be ziggurats. Even here in Indonesia, they're saying there's something there that's ancient. So we don't know because of the flood, but maybe even before the flood, the whole earth was already like the world. They were already communicating. They knew that there's a place in South America that's also full of pyramids, and in Egypt. So all these continents probably already have ziggurats, and even as Babel is the place and they got scattered, so the religion, you said rebellion, okay, and then they also had blood sacrifice. That's the one thing that they all also have in common is in Revelation, Jezebel, the woman is drunk with the blood of the saints or people.
Mhm.
And that happened in World War II, especially because there's like 6 million Jews, and I think there's about 20 million Christians in Europe who died. And I know in India you have your own history of deaths, of wars, because I think that's also a root of the evil is the killings. And it's not just the killing of soldiers but of the innocent. So all this whole time, although we will be discussing Babylon on the next meeting, but because of their really like torture and evil and blood, that's what I think. Even though Babylon looks so beautiful and civilized, their occultic. How can you get all this, engineering knowledge? If it's not from God, then it's from something else. So just those ideas of how we can realize at present, even as the tree of knowledge is knowledge, it's no longer from God. That's taken from God because of what Adam and Eve did. So thank you.
You made several interesting points, Gaileen. One, you said it looks like New Jerusalem, beautiful and magnificent. That is true. It's a competing fake imitation of what God does. That's Babylon. We see that more when we come to Revelation chapter 18. It looks to be like Christ, but it is not Christ. We come back to that foundational verse, let us make a Shem for our own selves. So it's presenting another Christ, another spirit, and another gospel. it's a cheap fake imitation. Do you have fake jewelry in Philippines? Do they sell
Of
fake jewelry?
course.
Yeah, yeah,
Of course.
yeah. It's like that. So next presentation would also be secular history. We would explore Nebuchadnezzar's time, Babylon, and then we will shift to Isaiah and Jeremiah. Those are two primary books that we would refer and build shadow concepts for Babylon. And then after we fully vet Old Testament scriptures, then we come to Revelation and make sense of this mystery woman, this killer woman that kills Christians all over the world. If she were a physical woman, how could she drink the blood of Christians all across the world? How much blood she has to drink physically? So it's impossible. Those are metaphorical statements. In her was found blood of saints and martyrs of Jesus Yeshua. These are all figurative statements. Yes, Alan, let's go to Alan.
Yeah, those are figurative statements for the war that's been raging on against the people who are faithful from throughout the ages. It's not a one-time end time event. It's an ongoing event, in my opinion. But what I wanted to say is when the languages were scattered, when the people were scattered due to communication, they took with them, the culture was still in them. They took that with them in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And then another empire rises, and then another. And each one inherits what was in the empire before them. For example, the Roman Empire inherited Greek things. They inherited Greek architecture and Greek pantheon, and they called it something different, but it was still the Greek pantheon. And the Greeks got it from another preceding empire, the Persians. And where did the Persians get it? From Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. And on it goes. So it should make sense to us that the essence of Babylon from Nimrod has penetrated throughout the millennia. And it's come down through the millennia into every succeeding culture in different forms with variations and modifications. Yeah. But the core essence of it is the rejection of the one true God and the creation of your own God. So what happened in the day of Nimrod happens again and again with each succeeding empire, even into the end of the age. That's one pattern that we can expect as we look around and we see the idols of our day and the trappings of our day and the allure of the lusts of the eyes and the lust of the flesh of our day. They're in essence from the same source, the same principalities and powers of spirits and dark places. And that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, Revelation 17 and 18 tells us it has become habitation of every unclean and hated bird and every false spirit. So Babylon in later chapters in Isaiah and Jeremiah, it acquires new symbology. It becomes a mountain, and also it becomes a tree of Babylon, and a mountain of Babylon, a proud mountain. And then it also becomes a woman in Revelation. So there's a additional symbology and symbols being transitioned. Each symbol comes with its own set of teachings. So we have incredible complexity and incredible depths of understanding of this Babylon.
Yeah, and another symbol, as you described, the 14-mile perimeter walls and the height going up hundreds of feet
Yeah.
is the picture of a stronghold.
Yeah.
Some would call it a citadel, castle, but the King James uses this word stronghold in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Maybe you could pull that up, and we could maybe see a connection here to the walls of Babylon.
So you want to go to 2 Corinthians.
Yeah, chapter 10. Where the word stronghold is used against every high thing that exalts itself against God. So talking about fighting the good fight against Babylon, because we all have Babylon in us, partly by Romans chapter 7, explaining the internal battle that we resist darkness within us, right?
Mhm.
So we're doing this fight. And here it compares in verse 3. It reminds me of putting on the whole armor of God, where it says, we do not war against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. He says a similar thing here. For though we walk in flesh, in the physical, the war that we wage is not against the physical. It's against Babylon. The weapons of our warfare are not physical, but they are mighty through God to the pulling down of Babylon. Now I paraphrase that for a reason. I'm trying to see if we all could agree that it fits. Casting down imaginations. What did they imagine? What did Nimrod imagine? Imagine making a name, a city, and a tower. So when we pull down the stronghold, we're casting down something not physical, but something that is in us, that's trying to overtake us. We're casting down high things that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. I see this fitting perfectly into the fight against Babylon in our modern age. Bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having a readiness to revenge all the disobedience that's within you. This is talking about you dealing with you, isn't it? Being ready to revenge or to take vengeance against your own disobedience after you have fulfilled your obedience.
So are you saying we have Babylon inside of us?
Absolutely. You were born in it. You've been immersed in it. And when you were called out of it.
Sure.
That's why I was saying earlier about Abraham being called out of it. We ought to consider ourselves also to be one called out of it. Come out from among them, lest you be partakers of their sins and of their plagues. So I thought this kind of fit a little bit. Maybe it's not a perfect fit, but it lends itself to the same concepts. The pulling down of a stronghold is like the pulling down of the wall of Babylon, or the bringing down, maybe even of the wall of Jericho. In any case, it's a stronghold, stronger than you're able to do on the human can do. So
That's true. Interestingly, the imaginations, God also uses that phrase at Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel, he says, behold, the people are of one tongue and one language, and nothing would withhold them from accomplishing whatever they imagine. So he's
Yes.
talking about imaginations.
yes,
So he confounded them with different languages. And the stronghold is a fortified military camp surrounding and protecting something. That's the idea of stronghold.
yep,
And you have high places also here. The high place is like your ziggurat. It's a high place. So we were told to pull down high places and destroy the strongholds and cast down imaginations. This is spiritual warfare against Babylon, against spiritual Babylon.
yes.